You've been in China now a week. You were at the China Development Forum. You're now at Boao. What do you make of what the Chinese leadership is saying in the face, obviously, of a slowing domestic economy? Well, they've stabilized the domestic economy, according to some estimates, including Huang Yiping there, and also, of course, those external shocks. What do you make of it right now?
They want us all to believe that they're fine, that they're prepared for another round of external shocks, and they're very focused on internal demand as the offset. The keywords, the top hits coming out of the NPC and going into the China Development Forum and Boao are household consumption. That's music to my ears. I have been preaching the gospel on consumer-led rebalancing in China for, I checked my files a couple days ago, 17 years in a row. And my Chinese friend said to me years ago, keep going, don't let go. You know, one of these days they might get the message. And this year they've gotten the message. But what I'm worried about, Steve, is that their program is more slogans than substantive actions that really give me confidence that the consumer revival is at hand.
Yeah, it's always in the implementation, and the devil's in the details, and it's really hard to wean yourself off that great cocktail of investment-led growth. And when we heard in Hong Kong a few months ago from Pan Gongcheng, the PBOC governor, he basically prioritized both still investment-led growth and consumption. Do you think it won't be enough?
Well, the trick on consumption, in my view, is you can generate a lot of jobs through rebalancing into labor-intensive sectors like services. You can raise real wages by moving poor people from rural to urban residences. And that generates growth, good growth in labor income. It needs to be faster, but you can do it. But then you have to convert that income into spending. And Chinese households want to save it because they're fearful of an uncertain future.
60% of their household wealth is tied to property, and we know what's happened to property.
Right. Well, it's not just that they've lost money in property, it's that their social safety net for health care and for retirement as they get older, and China's aging faster than any major economy in the world today, is inadequate. And so they are fearful of how they can make ends meet when they're older. And how do you convert that fear into confidence? That's a big stumbling block.
Do you feel a charm offensive, though, from Xi Jinping and the other leadership here through the CDF, through Boao and the like, and the meetings with the tech, the rehabilitation of Jack Ma, the meeting potentially tomorrow with foreign executives in Beijing, I assume, with Xi Jinping? There
is definitely a charm offensive going on. And we've seen this before, and they can be charming when they want to, and sort of not quite as charming when they want to as well. We'll see how the charm holds up on what we fondly are calling, at least what our president in the United States is calling, a Liberation Day next week, when tariffs go up around the world and there is retaliation that follows, and the risk of a global trade war increases. The charm could begin to wear off rather quickly in that event.
Well, you also compared Liberation Day to ground zero on globalization. Is that what's happened?
Yeah,
you really blasted yesterday in your panel this complacency about the threat to globalization.
Yeah, I was part of a typical panel that stressed, the glorious outcomes of win-win globalization. And I reminded them that globalization is not like it's carved in the Ten Commandments. We had a powerful wave of globalization that began around 1880 and ended with the imposition of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts in 1930 that led to a 60% plus contraction in global trade that contributed mightily to the Great Depression. And, here we are, 90 years later, and we are at risk of making a similar mistake with multilateral tariffs on all of our trading partners that we run deficits with. There are over 100 of them right now. And what the Trump administration doesn't understand, among many things, is that there will be retaliation when trades go up, when tariffs go up on the nations we run deficits with.
So, yeah, the Smoot-Hawley Act in 1930 came about 8 months after the bank crash, the Wall Street crash in October 29, and it lasted until 1939, the Great Depression. I've talked to a number of people here who say the U.S. potentially is heading in a similar trajectory towards recession. What do you think?
Well, I think, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that we're going to go into a depression, but I think the risks to the U.S. economy are tilting quickly to the downside for the simple reason is that Trump's policy uncertainty that he has injected, and he's doing it again overnight right now with autos and who knows what comes next, has taken our gauges of uncertainty to a record high. Uncertainty is the enemy of decision making. So businesses, when faced with uncertainty, will not make the big fixed cost decisions to hire new workers, to expand plants, and to engage in construction of new facilities to expand our productive capacity. So the uncertainty is really hitting the most dynamic segments of the U.S. economy right between the eyes, and you know that certainly raises the probabilities of recession later this year or into 2026 in the U.S. with collateral damage all around the interconnected, still barely globalized world.
Well, that's being reflected in the stock market of late as well. I think the NASDAQ was down another 2%. So the engine of the growth of the American economy has been reflected as a proxy in the market by the Mag 7. And what do you think what is your outlook for U.S. stocks throughout the rest of this year if this continues?
Well, I've learned as an economist that the last thing you want to do is call the stock market. But I did note and wrote about it that late last year, the so-called Mag 7, which Bloomberg has popularized with its proprietary Mag 7 index, which I follow hourly sometimes, had moved up to a market capitalization that was 34% of the total S&P market cap. I mean, it's an unbelievable concentration bet on 7 companies who are admittedly, in a perfect position to benefit from the revolutionary technologies of AI, but the market has valued them well in excess of any revolutionary impact they're going to have. And so, they corrected sharply. And, the DeepSeek shock effects of what's going on in this country are not an inconsequential part of that correction, and there's probably more to come.
Yeah, what do you make of the DeepSeek? It's on every official's lips right now. DeepSeek's and the other little mini dragons in Zhejiang province of AI. It's really given them a sense of confidence at a time when walls are building up abroad. It's
classic Chinese technology and imitation, where they take a great idea that has been put together by others, large language learning, and they've certainly played a role in developing and understanding the science as well. But, America, through OpenAI and others, were first movers. But it's a technology in the U.S. that requires an inordinate amount of data processing and energy to run the large language searching that is required. And the Chinese said, we can do the same thing. The algorithms to do the large language learning are not proprietary. We understand them. We've written some of them. But we can do them at a cost point that is so far below the American cost point, and the comparisons are staggering. 5 to 10% of the cost of the U.S. counterpart. So that challenges the whole dominance of American companies from the standpoint of the cost structure they have and the profitability they've been able to accrue, and the Chinese counterpart is quite extraordinary by comparison.
So, best case scenario, what do you think a Trump-China trade deal would look like? Where are the areas that potentially can be agreed upon, or there's concessions made? Do you see that happening, or is it more the worst case scenario?
Look, Trump is all over the place. He wants to deal with the fentanyl issue. He wants to deal with, quote, unfair trading practices. He sort of rolled out the script that Robert Lighthizer wrote for him in 2018 with the Section 301 allegations of theft of intellectual property, forced technology transfer, predatory M&A activity. He wants everything and more. It's hard to know what kind of deal he's really looking for. He did phase one, as a panacea. He called it the greatest deal in the history of deals. That came after, of course, the USMCA was also the greatest deal in the history of deals. China agreed to buy an incremental $200 billion of U.S. exports in 2020 and 2021.
And a review that's coming out April 1st.
Well, I've looked at the studies. Chad Bowen of the Peterson Institute, who went over to the State Department, did a brilliant study in assessing how much of phase one accomplished. And he said, the U.S. fell $200 billion short of hitting the $200 billion target. So, it wasn't a great deal.